Re-Zero, Arc 8, Chapter 16, The Undead Cataclysm.
Pale skin drained of complexion, and golden coronas housed in the center of dark eyeballs. With the sudden appearance of undead forces, both the Imperial Army and the Rebel Army had been doused with literal cold water as they fought a battle for the Imperial capital of Lupagana. Before anyone could notice, the battle between the living vying for control of the Empire had transformed into a struggle for existence between the living and the dead, and it was becoming increasingly severe. Ura. Raising a loud voice, he brandished his two-handed sword and slammed it into the enemy in front of him. In an attempt to block the strike, the enemy raised a battered sword that they had picked up from somewhere, but that blow smashed the brittle sword nevertheless, cleaving straight into the enemy's skull. Their cranium shattered, and yet what followed was not a spectacular scene of blood and brain matter spewing out, but a scene of fragments scattering about, as if a ceramic pot were smashed, an utterly unthinkable way for a human to die. The things were not only inhuman in appearance, but even the way they died ran contrary to the path of humanity. As somebody who lived in the Empire, there were opportunities to lay eyes upon races that possessed extravagant features in their appearance, but even if it was an opponent with a different number of arms or eyes, the way they died would remain constant. It was only logical that those with life should experience their lives come to an end in a manner befitting that quality. But these undead did not have that. Perhaps that was why he still felt such a strong repugnance towards them. Even in the Empire, where life was even said to be cheap compared to other countries, they did not trample upon life itself in the way these undead did. General, keep the front lines at bay. Let His Excellency the Emperor and the civilians escape. Soldiers, oh! When one of the generals shouted a command, the soldiers around him roared as if they were in a fever. As a result of the undead forces, the rampage of the Cloud Dragon, and the bulwark of the reservoir in the northern part of the Imperial capital approaching destruction, His Excellency the Emperor made the decision to abandon the Imperial capital, and withdraw all troops. The Imperial Army united all of its efforts to assist in the evacuation of the Emperor and the citizens of the Imperial capital. Ironically, with the advent of this third faction, the battle against the rebel army had gone undecided. No distinction remained between the regular army and rebels, and with the living and the dead divided into friend and foe, the fierce battle raged on. Just now, the Imperial soldier who had just destroyed a single undead was one who held their ground. He and the soldiers around him were fighting with all their might to stop as many of the undead as possible, even if only one, and see if they could take them down to meet death together. Soldier, no idea what those things are. But, soldier, if it is His Excellency the Emperor, soldier, he will absolutely find a way to eradicate you lot. No matter who the enemy may be, their faith in the apex of the Empire, Vincent Volachia, would never waver. That was the greatest reason why the soldiers were able to hold their ground without a hint of fear. Vincent had continued to deliver results. The amount of spilled blood and piled-up corpses of Vincent's enemies was the foundation of the Imperial soldiers' faith in him. Considering the absoluteness of his reign, his fighting spirit was of a different purity from that of those who so casually plotted insurrection, and thus, his fighting spirit directed towards the undead shaking the Empire was precisely the same. General, HK. All troops, bring that one down. The general cried out once more in response to the onslaught of an undead with a massive body. A bald undead of large build swung their arms about, and the Imperial soldiers who stood in their path were blown away like scraps of paper. If they were to permit the large undead to do as it pleased, a hole would open in the front lines, and the defensive position they had gone through so much trouble to form would likely crumble. In order to stop it, the soldiers obeyed the general's order and leapt towards the huge body at once. Soldier, the soldier who leapt first was struck, crushing his head, evading that carcass as it flew towards him. One Imperial soldier kept close to the ground as he slashed at the legs of the huge undead. The attack connected, and his opponent's stance collapsed. But, having perpetrated such an impudent act, the Imperial soldier's eyes met golden coronas looking down on him, and witnessed the dim gleam of a sword that had been plucked off somebody else. Just before he was impaled by its tip, the figure of a person wedged their way in front of the Imperial soldier. General, finish. It. HK. Pierced through the chest, the general cried out as blood frothed at his mouth. Shielded by the general, the imperial soldier gulped down, and immediately jumped out from behind the general's back. Swinging his sword with all his might, he smashed the gigantic undead's head in. The sword broke in half upon impact, but without any counterattack, the large undead's whole body shattered. And so, just as the general collapsed to the ground on his back, the large undead was struck down. His chest pierced, the general had met his end, and as the imperial soldier admired that bravery, he borrowed a replacement for his broken sword from the general's hand. Then, twisting his head around, he tried to search for the next enemy. Imperial soldier, fucking hell, the imperial soldier muttered, his cheeks contorting as he lowered the helmet he was wearing with his fingers. Having just evaded death, the imperial soldier looked as the next undead entered his field of vision. The general who had just died protecting him, his same equipment and face were worn by it. The corpse of the general was lying beside him, and he himself was gripping the general's sword. And yet, standing in front of him with a pale face and golden eyes, was that very same general. Imperial soldier, fucking hell, a battlefield where even one's comrades in arms could become undead, turning into enemies as soon as they died. Upon these flooded lands which he wanted to curse, where death was near certain, the imperial soldier raised his sword, and continued to fight until his life no longer allowed. The coupled dragon carriage retreated from the imperial capital of Lupagana and headed towards the fortified city of Gartla. The historical alliance formed between the Emilia camp and the Wallachian Empire's leadership within that carriage had unexpectedly encountered interference in an unforeseen manner. Although, as for the cause of that interference, Anastasia, what's wrong? Even though we were so worried about Natsuki-kun. It's distressing to see you looking at us like we're uninvited guests. Subaru, I'm not making such a face. I'm happy that we were able to meet properly. It goes without saying for Anastasia-san, but even if it's Julius with his stern expression, I'm glad about both. Anastasia, well, it ain't exactly a stern expression, but it's all 'cause of your appearance. And so, the two people, Julius and Anastasia, who had suddenly boarded the interconnected dragon carriage, looked down at the shrunken Subaru from head to toe with keen interest. Naturally, for Subaru, encountering the two of them, there was like a bolt from the blue. The level of surprise was comparable to when Priscilla had suddenly descended from the sky in the fortress city. However, why those two had ended up in the Wallachian Empire, Subaru did not consider himself so naive as to be unable to guess the reason. Subaru, even so, I understand that Emilia Tan and the others were looking for us, but for Anastasia-san and Julius. To go out of your way through Kararagai just for me? Anastasia, yep, exactly. Was a grand adventure, traversing through 3 countries. Crossing the border to Wallachia ain't something that can be done easily, and the journey was quite costly, to say the least. Subaru, Anastasia, I hate to come across as counting every penny, but I'd be happy if you won't forget about the costs we broke our backs for. Being sent to the Empire was beyond Subaru's control, but when he heard about the concerns that were expressed for him, his heart felt heavy. Under Anastasia's gaze and words, it seemed like Subaru was about to be burdened with a tremendous debt of gratitude. However, at that moment, a voice calling her Anna could be heard near Anastasia's neck. Echidna, you shouldn't bully Natsuki-kun recklessly. Considering his current appearance, no matter how you look at it, Anna, you seem like the villain bullying a child. Subaru, When Subaru raised his eyebrows at that voice, the other party responded by wagging a white tail. It was the fox scarf that Anastasia, who was dressed in a kimono, had draped over her shoulders. In other words, it was Echidna, the artificial spirit, whom Anastasia was carrying with her. Unlike the witch with the same name, Subaru had a recognition of Echidna as a companion whom he had gone through the ordeal of the Pleiades watchtower together with. Hearing her voice, Subaru also felt relieved and at ease. With this, among the companions who had gotten separated in the Pleiades watchtower, once Subaru showed his face to Patrash, who was outside, only Meili would have yet to see that he was safe. Anyway, Emilia, Anastasia-san. Julius, too, you made it to Wallachia safely. Anastasia, I'm relieved that Emilia-san and the others are safe too. As for the hardships during the journey, I couldn't find Natsuki-kun before Emilia-san and the others did, so it's a bit embarrassing. Emilia, no, that thought makes me feel really happy. Thank you. Emilia also welcomed Anastasia's appearance with a relaxed smile on her face. Indeed, the situation in the Wallachian Empire already tense, and on top of that, there was the undead disaster following the civil war. Inadvertently, she could say that she was very grateful that she did not cross paths with Anastasia and the others in the imperial capital, and with the joy of such an unexpected reunion coming to a pause. Vincent, are you quite finished rekindling your old friendship? Whether you know it or not, the time for the military conference is limited. The one who dampened the mood with those words, with a cheeky attitude and arms crossed, was Abel. With an unusually tolerant demeanor, he had been trying to gauge the atmosphere, but it seemed like he could not remain silent any longer. Making a sarcastic remark, Abel glanced sideways at Subaru and then said, "Vincent, another of your acquaintances. How unexpected, to think your influence has spread as far as Kuraragai." Subaru, as for that, it's a bit complicated. Anastasia-san and the others are on the Kuraragai side, but not exactly on the Kuraragai side. So, what's the deal with him? Subaru's puzzled question stemmed from the presence of Halibel, who stood beside Anastasia and the others. Halibel, the wolf-person who was known as the strongest in the Kuraragai city-states, demonstrated his existence while shaking the kiseru he held. Subaru wondered what position Anastasia and her group held, given Halibel's title and affiliation. Julius, I will handle that explanation. I will give a first-hand account of the particulars that allowed us to get on that flying dragon ship. In response to Subaru's question, Julius brushed the scar beneath his left eye with his finger and began to answer. The new white scar on Julius's profile, combined with his unfamiliar appearance in a traditional Japanese outfit, emphasized his dignified and handsome aura, giving Subaru a strange sensation. It was not to say that the influence of regression had not affected Subaru's perception, but it was probably more due to the changes on Julius's side that caused this sensation. Somehow, it felt like the current Julius had more composure than before. While there was elegance in his previous demeanor as the finest of knights, it seemed to be different from his current composure. It might have even been considered something that stood in stark contrast to it. His attitude, which seemed like he had discarded long-worn armor, was it a result of the experience in the Pleiades watchtower, or was there some other reason behind it? That remained uncertain. Julius, Your Excellency the Emperor Vincent Wallachia, I am relieved to see you safe and well. It is an unexpected honor to have the privilege of an audience with you once again. Ignoring Subaru's impression, Julius, having taken a step forward, bowed as he elegantly spoke. Abel, protected by Goze's large build as he stood, raised his shapely eyebrows at Julius's greeting. Subaru, too, harbored a sense of unease with Julius's once again part. Vincent, once again you say, But, neither do I remember granting audience to a swordsman of the city-states, nor do I recognize your face. What prompted you to say once again? Julius, with all due respect, I once received the opportunity to have a glimpse. However, at the time, I was not a swordsman of the city-states, but a knight of the kingdom. Vincent, the kingdom. Upon hearing the response of Julius, who did not show fear even when addressing Abel, the Wallachian emperor, Abel's black eyes narrowed in deep thought, but he could not seem to find any memory of the occasion. With such a dignified demeanor, there was no way that Julius could possibly be telling a lie. As such, even though the two were actually acquainted with each other, Abel had forgotten it. In other words, it was evidence that the effects of gluttony, which caused those around Julius to forget him, had yet to be undone. Vincent, you are deceiving me, and thus I do not understand your behavior. Bestets, yes. I, too, have no recollection of ever seeing this person. Vincent, it would be rare for Bestets to not be present at an audience. That is to say, it is not an issue between you and I, but one of a larger scale. By merely questioning the presence of Julius within Bestets's memories with a single word, Abel detected that extraordinary circumstances were entangled in the discrepancy of perceptions between himself and Julius. Witnessing Abel's speech and conduct, Subaru could not help but mutter, "Is this guy for real? Subaru, is it really normal to accept that so easily?" Something that's so absurd. Vincent, we are in the midst of an emergency, in which the dead have risen, and the Emperor is being driven away from the imperial capital. Speaking of the grand scheme of things, the fact that your body has shrunk does not make much of a difference either. What matters is whether or not it can be conceived as possible. Subaru, I wouldn't say that me shrinking is something that happens every day either though. No matter what kind of profound mysteries this world held, even if those were deemed as plausible theories just because they could be conceived, it did not make them things that could be so easily accepted with an yes, I see. As Subaru's brow wrinkled, Beatrice, holding his hand, rubbed the wrinkle between Subaru's brow with her other hand. Beatrice, don't overthink it too much, I suppose. It's much more convenient if they have the tolerance to accept it, than if they were to be obstinate about it. In fact, Subaru, that's true. Also, that feels good. Please keep doing it a little longer. Beatrice, roger that, I suppose. While Subaru continued to receive an eyebrow massage from Beatrice, Julius, with the questions that arose from the first act of his greeting cancelled, he returned to the main topic. That was, Julius, first of all, the lady present here is Anastasia Hoshin Summer. I presume you have already been made aware of Emilia Summer's identity and status, but Anastasia Summer is also of the same status. Serena, the same as Miss Emilia. In other words, candidates for the next king of the kingdom are together in a foreign country. My goodness, that's quite the amusing and rare situation. Serena contorted her facial scar in amusement, and Julius nodded silently at her words. At his affirmation, the gazes of the Imperial camp members turned towards Emilia, and meeting those gazes, her lips formed a smile. Emilia, yes, Julius is telling the truth. Anastasia San and I are both candidates for the royal selection, and we're friends. Anastasia, though for the time being, the thing about being friends is an agreement for after the royal selection is over. Following that introduction, I'm a representative of Kararagai's Hoshin Trading Company and one of the candidates for the royal selection in the Kingdom of Lagunica. Vincent, in addition to that impressive title, you are yet another person of the kingdom? Anastasia, I feel a little sorry if my title happened to surprise you, but to tell you the truth it ain't the only title I got right now. That's the reason we went out of our way to ride that flying dragon ship, ain't it? Just a short while ago, Abel had formed a friendly alliance with Emilia as the head of the empire. As Abel expressed his disapproval at the fact that another person from the kingdom had now become involved here, Anastasia put a stop to that. As Anastasia noted that she had a title that had yet to be disclosed, Emilia put her finger to her lips with a puzzled look on her face. Emilia, but Anastasia San is a representative of the trading company, a candidate for royal selection. And there's still more? Oh, maybe the employer of the mercenary group that Mimi and the others are a part of? Anastasia, the Iron Fang's under the jurisdiction of the Hoshin Trading Company, so I don't bother to add it to the title of trading company representative. Still, it's a separate matter from that. Emilia, separate. Told that she was incorrect by Anastasia, Emilia muttered in an adorable, troubled voice. And beside Anastasia as she smiled at Emilia's behavior, Julius gestured to her with his hand. Julius, on this occasion, Anastasia Summer is acting on behalf of Kararagai's League of Cities appointed as an emissary. She has made her way to the Empire. Otto, the Kararagai League of Cities, hearing Julius's reply, it was Otto whose voice had capsized. Otto broke his silence with an uncomfortable expression, to which Subaru thought was the right opportunity to ask what's the League of Cities? Subaru, I've heard that Kararagai is known as the City-States, a country with many cities joined together. Otto. That understanding is correct. The Kararagai City-States are, roughly speaking, a country composed of 10 large cities. Each city has its own mayor, who is the representative of the city, and there is a council formed by these people, which is the League of Cities. Subaru, It's like the Council of 10 in Pristella. Otto, rather, Pristella's Council of 10 is probably inspired by the League of Cities. As is the case with the Water Plumage Pavilion, there is a large influx of Kararagai culture in Pristella along the border. Subaru, oh, come to think of it, the Water Plumage Pavilion, where they had stayed at the invitation of Anastasia and her companions, was said to have Wafu style both inside and out, which had been introduced from Kuraragai. Going further back, Subaru believed that Kuraragai's Japanese style itself might be knowledge that was brought from his world, but he put that aside for the time being. In any case, Subaru, it's not a peaceful situation when you're not only a candidate for the kingdom's royal selection, but you've also entered the empire at the behest of the League of Cities as an emissary. Anastasia, you're right. Though not as bad as with Lagunica, Wallachia ain't on the best of terms with Kuraragai. I mean, the empire is basically hostile to everyone. Subaru, it's probably because the emperor is so sharp. It's possible his corners will be a little rounder from now on. Vincent, silence. When Subaru joined Anastasia's brazen and blunt comments, Abel, without changing his expression, hurled an admonishment at Subaru. Subaru stuck his tongue out at that, and Julius was taken aback by this exchange with Abel. Right after, he looked at Subaru in surprise, but since it would have been a long story if he were to explain, Subaru covered it up by simply sticking his tongue out at Julius as well. Anastasia, we heard about the mess in Wallachia while we were in Kuraragai, but we didn't come here to take advantage of it. Vincent, that is very auspicious. However, it is not as if you have no intention of doing so. Anastasia, well, you've got to be tough to get by. Wouldn't it be more uncomfortable for you to be helped for free? Vincent. But of course, at that mischievous look in Anastasia's eyes, Abel's gaze briefly turned toward Emilia. As for Emilia, she looked at them curiously, but from Abel and Anastasia's points of view, Emilia's good intentions were probably way more unexpected. Even Subaru would not go so far as to say that they should help Abel and the others without compensation, and if he did, Otto would give him 1,000 hellish sermons. Then, a hoarse voice asked for a chance to speak. When Bastetz received Abel's silent affirmation, he turned his narrow, nearly thread-like eyes toward Anastasia and Julius, while saying, Bastetz, I am wondering, may I ask why the city-states have sent an emissary to the empire in its current state? Perhaps, you suspect that the problems of the empire have come to your country, and you are pursuing them? Anastasia, even Kuraragai, which believes that time and money are of equal value, certainly wouldn't come to talk about money in the middle of such a busy day. Besides, interference in internal affairs will only cause loss if you're not prepared for it. Vincent, you are being evasive. Did I not say that time is limited? Anastasia, you're impatient, aren't you? All right, all right, all right. Halibel, You're fine with me talkin'? Anastasia called Halibel to her side as the imperial leaders were eager to proceed. Leaning against the wall of the dragon carriage, Halibel, who was making a ring with the smoke from his kiseru, stroked the fur on his chin as the gazes gathered from around him. In Subaru's eyes, his fur was really nice, lush, and a full coat. Halibel, then I'll go for it. Actually, something strange has been goin' on in Kuraragai for a while now. Well, the League of Cities have been urging me to figure it out. Subaru, something strange? Halibel, y'all can imagine what I'm talking 'bout, right? The Hotoke-san have been moving. Emilia, Hotoke, Subaru gasped at Halibel's easygoing, slightly pretentious words. But, Emilia, Goes and others tilted their heads at the unfamiliar word. Seeing that reaction, Halibel gave a wry smile as he said sorry, and, Halibel, righty right, that phrase is Kuraragai dialect so none of y'all woulda understood. In Kuraragai, when you say Hotoke-san it's got the meanin' of a corpse. I'm tryna say, Subaru, are you saying that the city-states also suffered harm from the undead? Halibel, something like that. Halibel calmly nodded, and the same shock that Subaru had just received spread to Emilia and the others anew. Given the undead forces that had come out of left field to interfere with the battle for the imperial capital, if the same thing had happened in Kuraragai, it would mean that the large incident was not a matter confined only to the empire. Subaru, then, this could be happening on a global scale if we're unlucky, right? What happened to that zombie disturbance in Kuraragai? Halibel, zombie, Subaru, the moving dead people. It'll be easier to understand if we have a name for them. Halibel, I see. For some reason, even though I dunno the word, it sure rolls off the tongue. Gathering Subaru's response, Halibel gnawed on his kiseru and replied in somewhat of a good mood. But, frustrated by Halibel's reply, Subaru hastily shouted out, "Halibel-san, with every passing moment, if the undead cataclysm was continuously expanding, Subaru, that would mean we don't have a moment to waste. For you to have come to the Empire is, Halibel, don't you worry, I done tidied up the zombie disturbance that happened back in Kararagai. So you don't need ta get all worked up 'bout Kararagai, Subaru." "Ah, Halibel, you're such a sweet kid, how about some candy?" "Ah, I ain't got no candy on me." Without doing anything like feeling around in his sleeves, Halibel soothed Subaru with a light-hearted tone. Involuntarily, Subaru pouted his lips, feeling rebuked for his hasty attitude. Julius, according to Mr. Halibel's investigation, the undead in question. No, the zombies, following the flow of where their damages have been incurred, it seems that they have gradually been proceeding towards the Empire. Therefore, in order to investigate the emergency that occurred within their country, and to issue an alert for caution to your country, the League of Cities has, Anastasia, we done employed Halibel since he was fully informed on the situation, and I've taken on the role as an emissary for the League of Cities. It was also quite the help for crossing the border. That was how Anastasia promptly summed up the details of how she took on the role of emissary for the League of Cities. She may have taken care as to not sound too serious, but unfortunately, no matter how much care she took, the contents of this matter were such that there was no way it would not become heavy. In particular, the fact that the undead cataclysm had occurred earlier in Kararagai was, Vincent, the incident that occurred in the city-states preceded the Empire. If that is the case, it could be said that the current undead catastrophe was brought to the Empire from your country. Is that not so, Anastasia? I guess that's possible, but we got a different view. Vincent, ho! If this is not an attempt to avoid responsibility, let me hear it. Anastasia, it seems like Kararagai was the first place where the Hotoke-san, where the zombies, caused damage. But, I think the main target was Wallachia, and Kararagai was used as a practice ground before that. Anastasia replied to Abel's snide remarks with an unchanged attitude. Contrary to her elegant demeanor, the hypothesis she posited was a rather extreme one. The view that Kararagai was the practice ground, and Wallachia was the main event, was far too harsh. Emilia, why does Anastasia-san think so? That the thing with Kararagai was not serious, and that Wallachia is the real objective. Anastasia, well, the scale of damage. When the question Subaru had in mind was spoken by Emilia, such was Anastasia's response. While the gaze of her pale turquoise eyes clashed against Emilia's amethyst eyes, Anastasia, the account was convoluted, but Gartler received the first reports of damage to the imperial capital. Even if it ain't fully accurate, it's true that zombies done captured the imperial capital, ain't that right? Julius, it is unusual for the imperial capital at the center of the Wallachian Empire to be captured, and for its citizens all to be evacuated en masse. Henceforth, I have no doubt that the intentions of the enemy who brought about this situation lie in the Empire. Vincent, your reasoning is sound. Hearing the deductions posed by Anastasia and Julius, Abel gave a brief response. However, deep in thought behind his tranquil sable eyes, the Emperor, prefacing his speech with incidentally, turned his gaze toward Halibel. Vincent, the damages you said you suppressed in the city-states, what truly happened there? Despite the state of the Empire, I have not heard anything of the city-states being destroyed by undead. Halibel, righty. I done stopped it before that happened. Though even if I'm saying that, seems like their goal wasn't ta make a mess of Kararagai, but just ta warm up like what Lil Anna said. Vincent, what does that mean? Halibel, putting it simply, the zombies I happened across had entirely replaced all the people in the city, and were living the same lifestyle as if they were still alive. Seemed like they didn't want us ta know that they had swapped places. Subaru, wah. As Halibel revealed the truth, Subaru became lost for words, and it was not only Subaru who was surprised. This group of wise people all had thoughtful expressions on their faces, and everyone who was surprised like Subaru was speechless. That was probably to be expected. Just now, Halibel's story was far too different from what had been assumed. Goes, You are saying that those undead are going as far as to disguise themselves as the living? It is true that Her Excellency Lamia spoke in the same manner as she did then when she was alive. But even so, Serena, if you see them as the living, then that destroys the perception of them being an opponent who attacks indiscriminately. It's already troublesome that some of them are intelligent, but if that happens, the way we deal with them as enemies will need to change quite a lot. This has become excessively amusing. Goes, just what is so amusing, High Countess Dracroy? Even your impudence ought to have its limits. Goes and Serena's views were pitted against each other as a shocking embodiment of that misconception. However, that reaction from the two was natural. In fact, Subaru had the same opinion. These were not opponents which could just be fought, it had become a matter of exploiting their weakness. Even still, Emilia, hey, Halibel-san, you said that everyone in the town was turned into zombies, but in that town, how many people were living there? It was a question that someone needed to ask. Subaru regretted that instead of himself, he had let Emilia do it. That regret grew deeper and larger after hearing Halibel's answer. That was because, Halibel, roughly, somewhere round 2,000 people, Emilia, that many. Halibel's answer clearly quantified the scale of the damage. One could only imagine that drastic scale of damage that made Emilia's expression severely darken, and drove a cold, sharp thorn into Subaru's chest. However, there were not just people who were hurt by Halibel's answer, there were also those who looked ahead. Vincent, if that many disguised themselves to be the living, I have no choice but to say that it is troublesome. What caused them to be exposed? Anastasia, the reason they were discovered was the amount of supplies that were going in and out of the city. They disguised themselves to some extent, but the numbers between the living and dead people didn't match up. The Hotoke-san don't need food or drinking water, so that's where the discrepancy came from. Vincent, the boundary between the living and the dead. It appears it cannot be crossed. Unlike Subaru, whose emotions halted him, Abel and Anastasia did not stop. While he felt frustrated by that difference, he also did not want to forget what he had told Abel, that it was necessary to not throw away this frustration. Vincent, Bastetz, you had an army stationed in the western part of the empire, correct? Indifferent to Subaru gritting his teeth, Abel posed a question to Bastetz. Bastetz nodded briefly with a yes to the emperor's question, and, Bastetz, we have received reports of unrest along the national border with Kararagai in the west. It was before the signs of civil war had expanded, but we feared countermoves and polarization of the rebel army, so we kept it maintained to keep them in check. You do not mean, Vincent, the one entrusted with that army? It ought to have been Groovy Gumlet, was it not? His narrow thread-like eyes opening slightly, Bastetz laid bare his astonishment. As if agreeing with the Prime Minister's realization, Abel let out a small sigh. That which the sigh spoke of was certainly one of the 9 divine generals. He was supposed to be the first-class general whom Subaru had never had a chance to meet face to face. The reason why Abel narrowed his eyes languidly when he said that person's name was, goes, Your Excellency. Surely not. Surely not. General First Class Groovy is, Vincent, keeping the unrest on the national border with the city-states in check. If that is why they did not participate in the great battle of the imperial capital, and if it has reached a state that we are not even able to meet with them, then there is no other recourse but to assume the worst. Serena, assume the worst? Even I would have a hard time calling that amusing. Goze's face flushed red, and Serena erased the thin smile on her lips. Giving a nod at these leading figures' reactions, Abel spoke. Vincent, Groovy Gumlet and his army have already fallen into the hands of the undead. If they fail to unite with us in the future, we ought to operate under that assumption. Goze, HK, in response to Abel's words, Goze's entire body trembled and he gnashed his molars. It was not a metaphor, he really ground his molars. As an immense amount of indignation ran through the body of the warrior named Goze Ralphon, the possibility of having lost his comrade was hitting him hard. Even for Subaru and the others, who did not know him personally, it was a silent blow. Bastetz, Your Excellency, as per your speculation, if an undead can pretend to be alive, then, Vincent, indeed, the reports from various regions, on their own, have lost credibility. without increasing the accuracy of the information, to engage in the battle for the recapture of the imperial capital will be next to impossible. Which of the delivered reports were from their living allies, and which ones were from the undead enemy, was not known. Presented with such a frightening possibility, Subaru gasped. Subaru, in other words, that's the reason why the League of Cities entrusted Anastasia-san with being their emissary. Anastasia, the sense of crisis, you'll feel it too, don't ya? It absolutely mustn't be allowed to spread. Therefore, we were allowed to go as a small group of reliable people. Anastasia spoke while nodding, to which both Julius and Halibel also expressed agreement. Due to the commencement of the opposition against the undead, they were two trusted people chosen for their individual war potential. Subaru, what about Ricardo, Mimi, and the others? Anastasia, they're building a united front with the League of Cities at the border. Basically, they won't be entering the Empire. If it doesn't stop with the Empire, Kuraragai will have to be prepared. Halibel, that ain't a good omen, but gimme a break. Well, at this point it's too late to do anything 'bout Lil Anna's sharp tongue. Anastasia, Halibel, Anastasia, who had answered the whereabouts of the absent Iron Fang, looked at Halibel with a smile. She put her hand on her cheek in a soft gesture, and kept her gaze fixed on Halibel. Anastasia, I overlooked it the first time, but can you stop calling me Lil Anna? I ain't a kid anymore, and I'm also a representative of Kuraragai. Halibel, though you say you're not a child, you don't look any different from when you were a wee lassie. Your character hasn't changed from the old days when you were such a rascal together with Ricardo. Anastasia, Halibel, alrighty, my bad. Waving his hand, Halibel raised the white flag to Anastasia. The seemingly familiar relationship between the two was intriguing, but compared to the pressing issue at hand, it could only be considered a trivial matter. Indeed, from the point of view of having to defend against the unprecedented undead cataclysm, Julius, once again, I would like to convey the intentions of Kuraragai's League of Cities. In order to contain the damage caused by the undead, the damage caused by the zombies, the city-states will extend as much support as possible to the Empire. Vincent. Regarding the support, we can work out the details later. Do you people have any ideas of means to stop this situation? Halibel, bout that, it ain't a natural phenomenon that the Hotoke-san wake up, right? No doubt, it's the result of some fella's gaudy intentions. In other words, Anastasia, the mastermind, the caster, the ringleader, or whatever you wanna call it, they gotta be subdued. A huge problem that could plunge the entire world into crisis, and the plan to overcome it. Stopping the entity responsible for this problem, the unseen enemy, was the highest priority of the Kingdom of Lagunica, the Volakian Empire, and Kuraragai's League of Cities. Subaru, the unidentified enemy. Thinking of the enemy whose true nature was unknown, Subaru murmured softly, what did this enemy look like, and just what were they thinking when they made preparations to commit such terrible barbaric acts? The mere thought of the hardships and obstacles that awaited them in their quest to defeat this yet-to-be-seen enemy sent cold sweat down his spine. However, Subaru, with this many members gathered here, Subaru's heart, seized by fear as it was nevertheless encouraged by the presence of those around him. The Emilia camp, who had even come to the Empire in search of Subaru and the others, the leaders of the Empire, who hardened their resolve to unite for the sake of protecting it, and the reliable reinforcements from Kuraragai. Subaru, no matter what the enemy is planning, there's absolutely no way that we're gonna lose. That was Natsuki Subaru's sincere declaration of war against the enemy. Indeed, it was around the same time as Subaru's surge of enthusiasm from within the coupled dragon carriages. Ferociously, the reservoir's water gushed forth from the destroyed bulwark, engulfing the imperial capital. As the muddy torrent swept away buildings and tore people and trees asunder indiscriminately, the blue-haired boy, having escaped to a high vantage point, used his hand as a visor as he gazed over the view. Boy, oh dear, I tried to buy as much time as I could, but I wonder if everyone was able to successfully escape. Hopefully Boss and the others didn't let the blood rush to their heads and mess up the decision to retreat. Light-heartedly muttering so, clad in a kimono and wearing Zori was Cecilus. In this grand battle for the imperial capital, as the most difficult problem in all aspects concerning the complete change in the situation was identified by his natural intuition and drama geek mindset. The leading actor of the world rushed to the scene. In fact, if Cecilus had not taken such a selfish and arbitrary action, the imperial capital would have been engulfed by water much sooner, and many more people would have failed to escape, resulting in an enormous amount of casualties. In that sense, Cecilus's actions, beyond anyone's expectations, coincidentally brought about a fortunate outcome for many. However, that was not the case for Cecilus, as the person concerned. With the sudden appearance of the undead forces, the state of the battle for the imperial capital had changed, and trying to surprise the third enemy who was attempting to snatch victory through a boorish intervention, Cecilus had leapt forth. Undoubtedly, he was in a state where he could sing his own praises of it having been a performance meant to enchant the world. And yet, Cecilus, even so, this was completely unexpected. Within the imperial capital engulfed by the muddy torrent, Cecilus murmured so, scratching his cheeks at the sight of undead who had all fled to higher ground like he had, still maintaining their fixation over those who yet lived. There was no doubt that they existed outside the natural order, resurrected by a technique unknown even to Cecilus. In fact, he had also encountered the being that had made them into such things, even though everything up to that point had proceeded in accordance with Cecilus's intuition. Cecilus, unbelievable, who could have imagined that the situation wouldn't be settled even when the caster is defeated, collapsed at the feet of Cecilus as he raised his voice, was the caster who had resurrected and commanded the undead. With beautiful pink hair and long ears, the young girl appeared to be around the same age as Cecilus, having confronted the blue lightning. Cecilus, she was a witch whose life had already met its end.